Hey, today I'm going to go through a couple of questions, essay questions for the Crucible in relation to the Common module. And just to give you a sense of how to apply your knowledge to the questions that you're getting. And the best way to do this is to make sure that you go from the perspective of the composer and the composer's purpose. What is Arthur Miller trying to do in his play and through his representation of the Salem witch trials, which, as you know, is an historical representation of the McCarthy period and shows very much his social commentary on it. So let's start off by having a look at this first question, which seems pretty basic, right, on first glance. So to what extent has the composer of your prescribed text raised questions into the human experience? So obviously breaking down the question, make sure that you identify to what extent, so to some extent, to a large extent, and that will obviously come when you figure out what you want to say about the rest. So what I really want to look at is this idea of raising questions. Okay, so look, raising questions implies a bit of like an open-ended statement, like, oh, you know, it's just like creating a bit of a discussion about, but it doesn't necessarily, it's kind of like discursive. It's like, oh, I don't have a real opinion about this, but, you know, I thought it'd be an interesting question to raise and then to see what people think. That's what raising questions kind of alludes to. Now, what you need to do is have a think about whether Arthur Miller is simply raising questions about something or really having like quite a strong critique against it, because they are two different things. And the reason I like this question is because it does seem quite straightforward, but where you'll really distinguish yourself as a high-performing student, and this is where, you know, less than 5% of students will actually go in their answers, is to try to think beyond what the question is asking, or what teachers refer to as higher order thinking. And that's what I'm mentioning in terms of like, does he simply raise questions or does he do more than that? So of course you can imagine most students, and you may be included, I was probably included, definitely to start with, where you just go, oh, you know, he's just raising questions about the nature of power and McCarthy period by simulating this, you know, witch trials, like whatever thingy play, right? So about the witch trials. But again, like, does he just raise questions about McCarthyism, or is he strongly opposed to it? Is he critiquing it by revealing the hypocrisies evident, the inconsistencies evident in the political power and the way that control is and sort of like morality is pushed on people or administered on the populace to the point where they're lying about actually being witches and whatever to save themselves, you know? So all the stuff that you would have certainly talked about, you know, the best way to start this particular one is to look at, again, what Arthur Miller's purpose is. So he's got this context of McCarthyism, and then how does he parallel that and create this world in the Crucible? And then, you know, how is he going about challenging and looking at the inconsistencies and the hypocrisies there? So, you know, the way Abigail, you know, to save herself and out of fear starts blaming, you know, pointing out other people. And then obviously she gets a bit drunk on power, or whatever you want to call it. And then, you know, we've got Proctor as the individual who really rebels against that, even sacrificing his own sense of self and his own, or no, not sense of self. He preserves his sense of self and his own moral integrity by giving up his life, you know, which not many people would do. And that's just showing the real, and that's probably the best demonstration of how Arthur Miller's not just raising questions here. He's really challenging it. He's really saying this is not right and this shouldn't happen. And we see that voice come out through Proctor and the fact that he's willing to give up his life to preserve his own moral integrity, which clearly has been lost, ironically, within the political structure of Salem, and obviously, and by virtue parallel of McCarthyism. So that just, I really wanted to give you that example just so you could sort of see. And then, of course, the human experience is looking at all those things that we talked about, you know, like integrity and morality and, you know, fear and hypocrisy, all those things. So obviously you're going to blend those in, but you know, in terms of answering this question beyond the normal range, you would say that it raises not only, so I would say to some extent or to a large extent raises questions, but also, you know, dramatically challenges or, you know, critiques, fundamentally critiques. So that notion of, you know, just going a little bit beyond the raised questions idea. Then I love this question because it really just threw everybody in 2019. And the last year's question was a lot more straightforward than that. But I just love looking at this because it's like everybody came up with all these memes like, what's love got to do with the Crucible? This is a ridiculous question. But again, go with what the composer's purpose is. If you've got that clear and you understand what Miller's doing in relation to his context, right? He was responding to things going on in his context and then creates this play, you know, to sort of challenge that idea. Then look at the idea of this that they may have said that sounds a little bit like left of field, right? So most people would go, oh, love, okay, let me start thinking about how love is illustrated in the play. Oh, these, you know, maybe Abigail loves Proctor, so let's, you know, so anyway, that's just going to be way too much you know, to do in an exam condition and really unworkable, because if you haven't actually prepared stuff on that and then you think, oh, I've just got to make something up based on that, it's just not going to go well. Right? So again, top down, go from the composer's purpose. What does Miller love? Potentially that is then reflected in what he portrays in his in the play, right? So what I would talk about in terms of the human experience is that he very much values and even loves the human experience of freedom, of truth, of democracy, of you know, freedom of expression, you know, all of these things that were lost in the play and also lost in his particular context. And if you, again, if you go about it from that way, you get to keep all your great points, all your great analysis, and you've also answered the question really well. So hopefully that helps. And if you do have any questions that you're not sure about how to answer, pop me a comment somewhere or, you know, whatever, and I'd be happy to see if I can create something on how you can answer that.